Hey there, welcome to the first development log for the mobile game I'm building from scratch called Soaring Gliders. This is also my first devlog on this channel, so I'll start out with an introduction. My name is Michael, I'm 24 years old and I work as a full-time software developer. I've dabbled around with game development as a hobby for a couple of years now. I've actually released a mobile game before during my first year at uni called the 10-second game on iOS. But I've since pulled it from the App Store. Not to toot my own horn, but it was an absolute viral hit with a grand total of, cue drumroll, 222 downloads.
Boo! You suck! Quit!
Yeah, okay, I know, that's pretty bad, but it taught me so much about game development, including implementing leaderboards and just in general, finishing projects. In the past few months, I've started to get a bit more motivated. With more free time on my hands now, I feel that I finally have the resources at my fingertips to start and finish a project. I've been working on the prototype that I've had in my head, and I want to show you what I've got so far. It isn't much, but I mean, it can't be worse than a 10-second game, right? Anyways, I'm starting this series of devlogs for a couple of reasons. The most important of which is to try and inspire others to create their own games or even to start learning programming. With a full-time job, it can be difficult to find time to devote to game development, but seeing the exciting progress of other passionate devs on YouTube helps me to stay motivated. And of course, I'm hoping it'll keep me accountable for completing this project, and perhaps it also get some valuable feedback from the viewers out there. So with that all said and done, I'll go ahead and introduce this project. What you're looking at now is the very beginnings of a mobile game that I'm calling Soaring Gliders. The name isn't the best, so I'm very open to new names, but until I build a title screen, I think it'll do for now. My vision for this game is to combine the best features from some of my favourite games. For example, you got the fun game mechanics and cool vehicles in hill climb racing, the satisfying gliding feeling when playing Tiny Wings, the competitive multiplayer mode in Bike Race, the awesome power-ups and fast-paced action in Jetpack Joyride, and of course without forgetting to mention, the beautiful graphics of Alto's Adventures. The gameplay for my game is pretty simple, and I want it to be a pretty raw experience for the player with minimal controls, just to give that satisfying feeling when they play my game. The idea behind it is pretty simple. You're the pilot of an aircraft that can't sustain long periods of flight due to a sudden fuel leakage problem. And by controlling the aircraft's throttle and flaps, you need to guide the vehicle in a manner similar to the bird in Tiny Wings, gliding through the air while using the flaps to hit that perfect hill for the maximum takeoff. So you can change the angle of attack of the flaps and also the lift factor component in order to change how much lift force is acting on the aircraft, and that causes the plane to lift off essentially, and you get that perfect combination to achieve liftoff. There's a bit too many controls here, but I am going to work on reducing the amount of things you have to tweak. But as you can see, increasing the angle of attack will essentially cause the plane to try and lift off. It's not perfect and it doesn't look like, that shouldn't really happen. But I'll definitely need to work on adding some damage to the aircraft as well. So something I've been working on is the hinge joint on the player's head, which I borrowed from Hill Climb Racing for now. He's called Bill. So let me switch on the crate. So you can see the head bobbing back and forth as the crate lands on the head. It was actually really hard to make. I had to spend a weekend on it actually, because I was just trying various different joints, and eventually I settled on a hinge joint and a rigid body on the head with negative gravity component, which gives that back and forth movement. So something else that I'm pretty proud of is the Parallax background. I followed a nice tutorial on it, which gives us this really cool effect where the background is static for things that are closer to the player, but essentially follow the camera when they're very far away. That gives the game a more dynamic effect. Unfortunately, we got this bug where the player gets stuck in the ground, and I think that's due to a really stiff suspension that hits the edge collider on the terrain too hard. But that can be fixed by adding some damage to the aircraft. So you can see the procedural terrain here where we've got three different terrain chunks that follow the camera. I do that because it means we render less on each update, and it just saves us from rendering too many polygons essentially. The way I achieved the procedural terrain was by dynamically generating a mesh renderer in the script, which then allows me to apply a texture on the mesh renderer, and I essentially create the triangles for the mesh renderer. And then I basically grab the coordinates and add a edge collider to the surface of the terrain for the vehicle to collide against. So by changing the roughness on the script called Terrain Manager, you can actually change essentially the roughness of the next terrain chunk that's rendered. You could also change the start and end height, and if you change the end height, you need to make sure you change the start height too, otherwise the next chunk after that starts at a lower height, which looks very weird. That's something I'm going to change when I revamp the procedural terrain, because I want to make use of Perlin noise so that when you recreate the terrain on startup, it creates the exact same terrain. Or I'll look into using sine curves and cosine curves to make it more flowy and similar to Tiny Wings terrain. So on the admin side, I've set up a Trello board which currently doesn't really have much, except some completed tasks you see here that basically got this simple prototype up and running. I've also added a couple more tasks in order to plan out this project. I've put these tasks into front burner and back burner, and of course I'm making sure to keep these tasks small and somewhat digestible. So the gist of this is, in the short term, I want to develop some of the core features so that I can continue developing the main gameplay loop and see if this is actually a fun concept. For example, tweaking the core gameplay, such as the plane mechanics, which would include things like looking into the lift factor and keeping that constant for each aircraft, making sure the velocity doesn't go to infinity, and also checking to see there's linear drag to make sure that velocity doesn't go into infinity, and just checking general housekeeping, making sure that thrust can only be in two states, i.e. to apply it on or off. In the midterm, I plan to add more fluffy features that actually make this into a mobile game, including adding things like UI, a menu screen, global leaderboards, more tracks such as hills, countrysides, motorways, moon, which means that we can vary the gravity factor or the component. We could also add more planes, such as you could have gliders, you could have jet planes, you could have cargo planes, and of course that would affect the speed at which the planes can travel, as well as how far it could travel with no fuel, which is pretty exciting. In the long term, I want to make this game pretty by adding music and visual enhancements, either by drawing the art myself or just hiring someone to do it for me. In the ultra long term though, a nice to have would be P2P multiplayer, so player versus player multiplayer. But I still haven't figured out where to fit this in, so any suggestions would be very useful. As you can tell, I'm super excited to get this project going and can't wait to work on some of the features that I mentioned on this Trello board. So I think this will do for an introduction. Over the next couple months, I'll be, fingers crossed, releasing videos as I tackle the tasks I've laid out on this Trello board. I'm hoping to make behind the scenes videos where I show you how I've hit my milestones, but also how I've incorporated game dev into my lifestyle alongside my hobbies and full-time job. Thanks for watching. If you've got any feedback about my game, this video, or just thoughts about where you'd like to see this series head, I want to hear about them in the comments below. Anyways, keep grinding LeetCode and see you in the next one.